Dr. Hansol Park stared at her computer screen, her eyes wide with disbelief. The data from the Mars rover shouldn't look like this. She checked the numbers again, then again. After 15 years of studying Mars, she had never seen anything like it. The office around her was quiet. Most of her colleagues at the Korean Space Research Institute had gone home hours ago. Only the soft hum of computers filled the room. The light of Seoul's tall buildings shone through the windows, creating shadows that danced across her desk. "This can't be right," she said to herself, running her hands through her short black hair. But the numbers didn't lie. The soil samples from the latest Mars rover mission showed something impossible, traces of complex organic compounds that suggested ancient life. Hansol reached for her phone and quickly dialed a number. After 3 rings, a tired voice answered. "Director Kang, I'm sorry to call so late, but you need to see this." 20 minutes later, Director Kang stood behind her desk, his face lit by the blue glow of the computer screen. His usual neat appearance was missing. His tie was loose, and his gray hair was messy, but his eyes were sharp as he studied the data. "Show me the pictures again," he said. Hansol pulled up the images from the rover. They showed a series of strange rock formations in a dried-up riverbed. The rocks had patterns that looked like tiny tubes and circles. "These patterns," Hansol explained, pointing to the screen. "They're exactly like the fossils of ancient bacteria we find on Earth. But there's more." She clicked to another screen showing chemical analysis results. The soil around these rocks contains organic compounds that shouldn't exist on Mars today. And look at the dating results. These rocks are from when Mars still had liquid water on its surface. Director Kang pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. "You're saying these are fossils of Martian bacteria?" "Yes," Hansol said firmly. "And not just any bacteria. These seem to be from a time when Mars was warm and wet. The chemical makeup suggests these bacteria lived in an environment much different from today's Mars. They needed liquid water and a thicker atmosphere to survive." She opened another file, showing a computer model of ancient Mars. "Our current theories about Mars' past climate can't explain this. These bacteria would have needed a much warmer environment than we thought possible. Something changed Mars' climate dramatically, and quickly." Director Kang was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Hansol with serious eyes. "Do you understand what this means? If you're right, this changes everything we know about Mars' history, about the possibility of life in our solar system." Hansol nodded. "I know. That's why I called you. We need to verify these results before we tell anyone else. And..." She hesitated, then continued, "I want to put together a special team. I know exactly who we need." Director Kang stood up and straightened his tie. "Make your list. I'll call an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning." "But Hansol," he paused at the door, "be prepared. If this gets out, every space agency in the world will want to be involved. And not everyone will be happy that a Korean team made this discovery." After he left, Hansol turned back to her computer. She opened a new document and began typing names. At the top of her list were 2 people: Dr. Jin-Woo Kim, the brilliant but difficult climatologist who had new theories about Mars' atmosphere, and Dr. Myra Song, the young astrobiologist who had recently published controversial work about extreme life forms. Outside her window, the first light of dawn began to appear over Seoul. Hansol didn't notice. Her mind was already on Mars, thinking about the ancient bacteria that had lived there, and the mystery of what had happened to their world. She had a feeling that this discovery was just the beginning of something much bigger. Tomorrow, everything would change. But for now, in the quiet of her office, Hansol Park was the only person on Earth who knew that humanity's understanding of life in the universe was about to be completely transformed. The next morning, Dr. Jin-Woo Kim walked into the Korean Space Research Institute with a frown on his face. He didn't like early meetings, especially unexpected ones. The message from Hansol had been brief. "Emergency meeting, 8 a.m. Level 3 conference room. It's about Mars. When he entered the conference room, he found Han Sol already there with Director Kang and a woman he didn't know. The woman wore a neat blue suit and had her long hair tied back in a simple style. "Dr. Kim," Han Sol said, standing up. "Thank you for coming. This is Dr. Myra Song, our new astrobiologist." Jinwoo nodded politely, but his mind was already on the large screen behind them. It showed pictures of Mars' surface, strange pictures he had never seen before. "What's this about?" he asked, sitting down. Han Sol took a deep breath. "Last night, I found something in the new rover data." She clicked through the images, explaining what she had discovered. As she spoke, Jinwoo leaned forward, his frown deepening. "Impossible," he said when she finished. "The atmosphere couldn't have changed that quickly. My models show." "Your models might be wrong," Mayray spoke up. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Look at these chemical signatures. These bacteria needed a thick atmosphere and liquid water. The evidence is right here." Jinwoo turned to argue, but Han Sol raised her hand. "This is exactly why I called both of you. Jinwoo, your work on Mars's ancient atmosphere is the best in the field. Mayray, your research on extreme life forms could explain how these bacteria survived. I need both of you to help me understand what happened on Mars." Director Kang cleared his throat. "There's more. NASA and the European Space Agency have noticed unusual readings from their own Mars missions. They don't know what we know yet, but they will soon. We need to move quickly." "What exactly are you asking us to do?" Jinwoo asked. Han Sol smiled. "I want us to work together. Jinwoo, your climate models need to be updated with this new data. Mayray, we need your expertise to understand these life forms. And I think—" She paused, looking at each of them. "I think we might find something even bigger than ancient bacteria." Mayray tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "Look at these patterns," Han Sol said, zooming in on one of the images. "They're organized. These bacteria weren't just surviving. They were thriving. Something made Mars go from a warm, wet planet to what it is today. If we can figure out what happened, we might be able to prevent the same thing from happening to Earth." Jinwoo finished, his eyes wide with understanding. The room went quiet as they all thought about this. Finally, Director Kang spoke. "You have 2 months. After that, we'll have to share our findings with the international community. Whatever you're going to do it fast." As they left the conference room, Jinwoo caught up with Han Sol. "I still think you're wrong about the atmosphere," he said, "but I want to help prove it one way or the other." Han Sol smiled. "That's why I chose you. You won't accept anything without proof." And Mayray, she called to the astrobiologist who was walking ahead, "Can you start analyzing those chemical signatures today?" Mayray turned and nodded. "I already have some ideas. These bacteria, they remind me of something I've seen before, on Earth." That afternoon, the 3 scientists set up in their new shared lab. Jinwoo brought his climate models, Mayray set up her analysis equipment, and Han Sol covered one wall with Mars images. They worked mostly in silence, each focused on their own tasks, but there was a feeling of excitement in the air. They all knew that somewhere in their data was a story about Mars' past, about life, and about changes that could affect both Mars and Earth. They just had to find it, and they had to find it fast. 3 weeks had passed, and the team was stuck. Jinwoo's climate models kept failing, and Mayray's tests showed confusing results. Han Sol spent long hours staring at the Mars images, looking for patterns she might have missed. One evening, as they were about to leave, a young man knocked on their lab door. He wore a simple black t-shirt and looked nervous. "Can we help you?" Han Sol asked. "I'm Ta-Hyun Lee," he said quietly. "I work in the computer department. I heard about your project, and I think I can help." Jinwoo frowned. "This is classified work. How did you hear about it?" Tai-hyun shifted uncomfortably. The computer systems here are all connected. I noticed strange patterns in the data you were processing. I created a program that might help analyze it better. Hansol was about to tell him to leave, but Mireille spoke up. Let him show us. We're not getting anywhere on our own. Tai-hyun pulled out a laptop and connected it to their main screen. His fingers moved quickly over the keyboard as he explained. Your climate models are looking at the whole planet at once. My program breaks Mars into small sections and analyzes them separately, like putting together a puzzle. The screen filled with colorful patterns. Each pattern showed how a different part of Mars had changed over time. Jin-woo leaned forward, his eyes wide. Look at this, Ta-hyun pointed to a red area. Something happened here first. Then the changes spread across the planet like ripples in water. Hansol grabbed her notes. That's the same area where we found the bacteria fossils. Mireille rushed to her computer and pulled up her latest test results. The chemical changes in the rocks, they follow the same pattern. Whatever changed Mars' climate started in that exact spot. Jin-woo was already typing furiously on his computer, updating his models with this new information. If we add these patterns to the climate model. He stopped suddenly, staring at his screen. Everyone needs to see this. They gathered around as Jin-woo's new model played on the main screen. It showed Mars as it was long ago, a green and blue planet with white clouds. Then, starting from the spot Tai-hyun had found, a wave of change swept across the planet. The atmosphere thinned. The water disappeared. The green turned to red. It only took a few hundred years, Jin-woo said softly. Something triggered a chain reaction that transformed the whole planet. Mireille pointed to some data readings. The bacteria in that area, they didn't all die. Some of them changed. They adapted to survive underground where there was still water. Hansol turned to Tai-hyun, who had been quietly watching. Can your program predict where these underground bacteria might still be living? He nodded. I'll need more data, but yes, the program can find places that match the conditions these bacteria need. Then you're part of the team now, Hansol said. We have 5 weeks left to prove all of this before we have to share it with the world. That night, none of them went home. They worked together, combining their different skills. Tai-hyun's program analyzed more data. Jin-woo refined his climate models. Mireille studied how the bacteria could have survived. Hansol coordinated everything, making sure they didn't miss any important details. As the sun rose over Seoul the next morning, they had their first complete theory about what had happened on Mars. They also had something else, hope. If some bacteria had survived Mars' great change, maybe they were still there, deep underground, waiting to be found. But they all knew their discovery would raise difficult questions. If one planet could change so quickly, could it happen to Earth? And what would they find if they looked deeper into Mars' underground waters? The answers would come soon, but they wouldn't be what anyone expected. The day of the International Space Conference in Seoul arrived too quickly. Hansol stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of scientists from around the world. Her team sat in the front row, giving her encouraging nods. Our research shows that Mars once had a climate similar to Earth's, she began, showing the images and data they had collected. We have found evidence of ancient bacterial life, and we believe some of these bacteria may still survive underground today. The room stayed quiet as she explained their findings. Then the questions began. These conclusions are impossible, said Dr. Yoona Choi, standing up from her seat in the third row. She was a well-known scientist who had studied Mars for 20 years. Your team is too inexperienced to make such claims. Your evidence is not enough. Hansol kept her voice calm as she responded. The evidence is in the data, Dr. Choi. We invite other teams to verify our findings. Your climate models break all the known rules about Mars, Yoona continued. No one has ever suggested the planet could change so quickly. Jin-woo stood up. The rules were wrong. Our models show exactly how it happened. We can prove it. The room filled with loud discussions. Some scientists supported the team's findings, while others agreed with Dr. Choi. Director Kang watched from the side, his face worried. Then Mai Ray's phone buzzed. She looked at it and suddenly stood up, her face pale. "Han-Sol," she called out. "You need to see this." On her phone was a message from Ta-Hyun, who was monitoring their data back at the lab. The Mars rover near their study site was picking up strange signals. They were like radio waves, but they came from underground. Han-Sol quickly ended her presentation, and the team rushed back to their lab. Ta-Hyun was already there, his computers showing waves of unusual data. "It started an hour ago," he explained, pointing to the screen. "The signals are coming from the exact spot where we found the ancient bacteria. They're getting stronger." "Could it be equipment failure?" Jinwoo asked, checking the rover's systems. "No," Ta-Hyun said. "I've checked everything. These signals are real. And they have patterns. They're not random." The team worked through the night, analyzing the signals. Other space agencies began detecting them too. Soon, news of the mysterious Mars signals spread across the world. The next morning, Dr. Yoona Choi arrived at their lab, looking less confident than before. "I've seen the signal data," she said quietly. "I still think your climate theories are wrong, but something is happening on Mars, something we can't explain." Han-Sol looked at her team, then back at Dr. Choi. "We need to work together now. These signals could be connected to the bacteria we found. If some of them survived underground, they could have evolved over millions of years," Mai Ray finished. "We don't know what they might have become." Director Kang called an emergency meeting with all major space agencies. On video screens around the world, scientists watched as the signals from Mars grew stronger. They all knew they had to act quickly, but no one knew exactly what they were dealing with. "We need to send a mission to Mars," Han-Sol told the emergency meeting. "We need to find out what's causing these signals." "That's impossible," someone said. "It would take years to plan a Mars mission." "Not if we work together," Han-Sol replied. "Not if we all understand what's at stake." As she spoke, Ta-Hyun sent her an urgent message. The signals had changed again. They were now forming clear patterns that looked almost like communication. 3 months later, Han-Sol stood in front of the massive rocket at the Naro Space Center. The morning air was cool, and the sun was just starting to rise over the ocean. She checked her spacesuit one more time, still amazed at how quickly everything had happened. The strange signals from Mars had convinced everyone to work together. Space agencies from around the world had shared their resources and technology. They had built this mission in record time, using the newest spacecraft design that could reach Mars in just 2 months instead of the usual 7. "Ready?" asked Jae-ho Kang, the mission's pilot. He was tall and calm, with 15 years of flying experience. His steady voice helped Han-Sol feel less nervous. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied. She looked at the third member of their crew, Sang Minam, who was checking their scientific equipment. Sang Mai was an environmental specialist who knew everything about keeping people alive in space. From the control room, Han-Sol's team watched through thick glass windows. Jinwoo and Mai Ray would guide them from Earth, while Ta-Hyun would manage their communications and data systems. Even Dr. Yoona Choi was there, now working with the team instead of against them. "Remember," Director Kang said through their radio, "your primary mission is to collect samples and find the source of those signals. Don't take unnecessary risks." The launch went perfectly. As Earth disappeared behind them, Han-Sol thought about everything that had brought them here. Just 4 months ago, she had been looking at strange pictures from Mars. Now she was actually going there. During the long journey, they studied the signal data. The patterns had become clearer, appearing every 12 hours like clockwork. Sang Mai noticed they seemed stronger when Mars was warmer during its day. "It's like whatever's making them needs heat to work," she explained, showing Han-Sol her analysis. "Just like the ancient bacteria needed warmth to survive." 2 months passed quickly. Soon, the red planet filled their windows. Their landing site was near the place where Hansol had first discovered the bacteria fossils. It was also where the signals were strongest. Landing sequence starting, Jaiho announced calmly. Their spacecraft, named Morning Calm, began its descent through the thin Martian atmosphere. The landing was rough. Mars dust storms made it hard to see, but Jaiho's skills got them safely to the ground. When the dust cleared, they saw the red desert stretching out around them. "We're here," Hansol said softly. "We're actually on Mars." They had to wait 6 hours while their systems checked everything. Hansol used the time to talk with the team back on Earth. The signals were even stronger now that they were on the surface. Finally, it was time. They put on their special spacesuits, designed to protect them from Mars' harsh environment. The suits had new technology that could detect even the smallest signs of life. "Remember," Sang-mai said as they prepared to exit the ship, "we have enough supplies for 3 weeks. After that, we must return to Earth, with or without answers." The airlock door opened slowly. Hansol was the first to step onto the red soil. Through her helmet, she saw the place she had studied for so long. Somewhere under these rocks was the answer to Mars' greatest mystery. Their equipment started beeping. The signals were coming from a cliff face about 1 kilometer away. As they began their careful walk across the Martian surface, Hansol felt sure they would find something that would change human history forever. The cliff face looked ordinary from a distance, but as the team got closer, they saw something unusual. There were small holes in the rock, perfectly round and evenly spaced. The signals were coming from deep inside these holes. "These weren't made by wind or water," Sang-mai said, examining the holes with her instruments. "They're too perfect. Something made these." Jaiho checked their radar equipment. "There's a large cave system behind this cliff. The holes might be entrances that were covered up over time." Hansol's heart beat faster as she remembered the bacteria fossils they had found. Could the bacteria have made these holes? Maybe as they moved deeper underground when the climate changed. They used small explosive charges to carefully open one of the larger holes. As the dust settled, they saw a tunnel leading down into darkness. Their suit lights showed smooth walls that seemed to spiral downward. "The team on Earth needs to see this," Hansol said, turning on their video feed. Back on Earth, Jinwoo, Mireille, and Taehyun watched in amazement as the cameras showed the strange tunnel. "Those walls," Mireille's voice came through their radios. "They're covered in the same patterns we saw in the bacteria fossils, but much bigger." The 3 astronauts moved slowly down the tunnel. Their instruments showed the air pressure increasing as they went deeper. After about 50 meters, they entered a large cave. "Look at the ceiling," Jaiho said, pointing upward with his light. The cave ceiling was covered in glowing blue patches. As they watched, the patches pulsed with light, creating patterns similar to the signals they had detected. "The bacteria," Hansol said softly. "They didn't just survive. They evolved. They learned to communicate using light and electromagnetic signals." Sang-mi's instruments were working quickly. "The air in here, it's different. There's more oxygen than there should be. And I'm detecting liquid water. These bacteria are still changing their environment, just like they did on the surface millions of years ago." They collected samples carefully, storing them in special containers. The glowing bacteria seemed to react to their presence, pulsing faster when they got closer. "There's something else," Jaiho said, looking at a deep scanner. "These caves go down for kilometers, and there are more chambers like this one. Hundreds of them." Hansol was examining the cave walls when she noticed something that made her stop breathing for a moment. In one corner, partially buried in the rock, was a fossil unlike anything they had expected. It showed clear signs of complex cell structure, more advanced than simple bacteria. "Everyone," she called out, her voice shaking. "I need you to see this. These bacteria didn't just survive. They're still evolving, still becoming more complex. And," she paused, making sure her camera was showing the fossil clearly to the team on Earth. I think they might have done this before. Millions of years ago, some of these bacteria might have traveled to Earth on meteorites after Mars was hit by asteroids. The cave was silent except for the soft beeping of their instruments. They all understood what this meant. Life on Earth might have started with these Martian bacteria. Humans might be carrying the DNA of creatures that began their journey on Mars. We need to collect more samples, Sangmai said finally. The world needs to know about this. As they worked, the glowing patches continued to pulse above them, like stars in an underground sky. They had found more than just evidence of life on Mars. They had found humanity's ancient ancestors. The warning alarm in their suits started beeping just as they finished collecting their last samples. Sangmei checked her environmental monitors and her face turned serious behind her helmet visor. A dust storm is coming, she announced. A big one. We need to get back to the ship now. Han Sol carefully packed the final sample container. They had spent 6 hours in the caves, collecting specimens of the glowing bacteria and taking hundreds of photographs. Now their discovery was at risk. How long do we have? Jai-ho asked, already planning their route back to the surface. The storm will hit in 30 minutes, Sangmei replied. It could last for days. They moved quickly through the tunnel, climbing back toward the surface. The wind was already getting stronger when they reached the entrance. Red dust swirled around them, making it hard to see. The ship is 1 kilometer away, Jai-ho reminded them. We need to move fast, but stay together. They formed a line, with Jai-ho in front and Sangmai at the back. Han Sol walked in the middle, carrying their most important samples. The wind grew stronger with each step, pushing against them like an angry hand. Halfway to the ship, Han Sol's suit computer showed a problem. The dust was getting into their air filters. They would run out of clean air before reaching the ship. We can't all make it with our current air supply, Jai-ho said, checking everyone's systems. Then he made a quick decision. I'm giving you both part of my air supply. The samples are too important to lose. No, Han Sol protested. We can't risk your life. I'm not risking it, Jai-ho said calmly. I can hold my breath longer than both of you. I've trained for this. Trust me. Before they could argue, he connected his suit's backup air supply to theirs. His calm face showed no fear as he watched his own air levels drop. The storm was now so strong they could barely see the ground in front of them. They moved forward step by step, following the ship's beacon signal. Jai-ho started breathing in short, controlled breaths, using every bit of his training to conserve air. Finally, they saw the ship's outline through the dust. But there was a new problem. The storm's static electricity was affecting their samples. The containers holding the living bacteria were starting to warm up. The bacteria will die if they get too hot, Han Sol said, her voice worried. Sangmai thought quickly. She took off her suit's outer temperature regulation system. Put the samples in this, she said. It will keep them cold until we reach Earth. I can manage without it. With Jai-ho running out of air and Sangmai now fighting against Mars' extreme temperature, they made their final push to the ship. They reached the airlock just as Jai-ho's air supply ran out. His face was blue, but he was still conscious. Inside the ship, they quickly restored their air and temperature systems. All 3 of them were exhausted, but they were alive. More importantly, their samples were safe. The storm is getting worse, Sangmai said, looking at the ship's sensors. We need to leave Mars now, or we'll be stuck here for weeks. Jai-ho, still catching his breath, moved to the pilot's seat. Launching through a dust storm isn't safe, he said, but neither is staying here. As the storm raged around them, they strapped themselves in. The samples were secured in their special containers, preserved by Sangmai's quick thinking. They had only one chance to get off Mars with their incredible discovery. Everything depended on the next few minutes. 1 year after the Mars mission, Han Sol stood in front of a much larger audience than before. The Grand Hall of the World Science Center in Seoul was filled with scientists, reporters, and government officials from around the world. Behind her, a large screen showed pictures of the glowing bacteria, now known as luminous Martians. The mission's success had changed everything. The samples they brought back proved that life on Earth might have started on Mars. The bacteria they discovered were still alive in special containers, still creating their beautiful patterns of light and electromagnetic signals. The Mars bacteria show us something amazing, Han Sol explained to the audience. They teach us that life can survive even when a planet changes completely. They also show us that Earth and Mars share a connection we never knew about before. In the front row, her team sat together. Ji-ho had fully recovered from his brave act during the dust storm. He now trained new astronauts for future Mars missions. Sang-mai had used her knowledge to design better ways to protect life forms during space travel. Her work would help humans establish the first permanent base on Mars. Dr. Yoona Choi, who had once doubted their findings, now worked closely with the team. She helped them understand how the bacteria had survived Mars' climate change. This knowledge was already helping scientists protect Earth's environment. Today, we take the next step, Han Sol announced. The first permanent Mars colony will launch next month. Thanks to what we learned from the ancient bacteria, we know how to create safe underground homes on Mars. And maybe one day we can help make Mars's surface warm and wet again, just like it was millions of years ago. Jin Woo and Mei Ray had used their discoveries to develop new theories about how planets change. Tai-Hien's computer programs now help scientists around the world study the bacteria's communication patterns. They were learning new things every day. After the presentation, Han Sol walked through the Science Center's new Mars exhibit. She stopped at a special display showing the timeline of their discovery. She remembered that late night in her office when she first saw the strange patterns in the Mars rover data. A small group of students walked past, led by a young girl with curious eyes. Han Sol recognized her. It was her daughter, Min-ji, bringing her school friends to see the exhibit. "My mom found the Mars bacteria," Min-ji told her friends proudly. "And when I grow up, I'm going to live on Mars and study them too." Han Sol smiled, watching the children press their faces against the glass to see the glowing bacteria. Their eyes were full of wonder as they watched the light patterns pulse and dance. Next month, Min-ji would wave goodbye as her mother boarded the first colony ship to Mars. Han Sol would help build humanity's new home there, while continuing to study the remarkable bacteria that had changed their understanding of life itself. The bacteria's story had started billions of years ago on Mars. It had continued through space, possibly helping to start life on Earth. Now, thanks to human curiosity and courage, the story would continue into the future. As Han Sol looked at the children's excited faces, she knew this was just the beginning. Humanity's greatest adventure was about to start, and it had all begun with some strange patterns in the rocks of Mars.